Okay, 6:03, so let's get going. So we're back 2 weeks later, where the world keeps on changing faster than one could possibly imagine or possibly anticipate. Obviously, started writing about it a week and a half ago about what's happened in Syria, and I guess we can start there and then move around to other issues, including the domestic issues that have come roaring back in the last few days. Uh, you know, I said to somebody a couple of last week sometime, it's time to stop talking about black swans. Black swans are the event that you don't ever expect to happen, and they happen. Well, too many black swans have been happening, so I think we can no longer talk about black swans, but that's clearly what happened in Syria. Uh, no one expected it. No one had it on their plate as something that might possibly happen this year. And on top of which, once again, we've proved that too many quote unquote experts have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. During the course, after the first couple of days, I heard many experts come on TV and say, well, this happened, but the Assad regime is going to get the help from the Russians and the Iranians. And before long, they're going to push the rebels right out of Syria. I was skeptical because I didn't really think the Russians had anybody to send to Syria. The few planes they had there is what they could have possibly afford to send. The Iranians are stretched thin. The Hezbollah can't possibly send anybody. So that was quite questionable to me, but okay. No one understood how weak Assad's army was. Say weak is not even the right word. Didn't exist because the people who were fighting for Assad, the average soldier was not getting paid. If he was getting paid, he was getting paid very little money. Why risk your life on a regime that, by and large, almost everybody knew somebody who had been taken away to the prisons? The regime was popular amongst nobody, even amongst the Alawites at this point. It wasn't that popular. And so it basically folded like a house of cards, quicker than anyone possibly imagined. And, nothing that anyone had anticipated. Now, the big question is what happens now? Israel is taking no risks. I'm not sure I agree with the policy at the moment completely, although it's pretty much everyone in this country from all sides of the political spectrum thinks it's the right things to do. A, taking the forward positions in terms of demarcation lines, and B, destroying whatever exists in terms of material of the Syrian army. Now, destroying the material from the Syrian army is twofold. One is not to allow, if the rebels end up not being our friends, and I'm using the word friends very loosely, um, so that they don't get some of these advanced armaments, or it doesn't make its way to Hezbollah, or three, which is related, it doesn't make its way to rebels and terrorists in other parts of the world. For instance, Hamas ended up with some of the military arms that were in Libya when it fell apart. So that was always a concern, and Israel decided, well, if it can do something, so it's going to do it, and indeed it did. It has destroyed most of the heavy and medium weaponry that the Syrian army has, all of its um, all of its chemical weapons and laboratories and everything else. It's done that, from what I can tell, without any Syrian casualties, because all of these things were abandoned by the Syrian army. So it wasn't they went to they didn't bomb an airbase full of people. They bombed an airbase with no people there. Obviously, that can't continue much longer. The window is closing. And it's also closing because the Syrian government is starting to make noises about they should stop attacking us. Uh, the Syrian, the commander of the rebels has said basically we're not looking for war with anybody, therefore no one has any reason to start up with us. Uh, it's this big question. Clearly, they came to power as a revolutionary group, even though it was a mixture of different groups. How much of their ideology they still have, and we've heard some of their fighters talking about, well, on the way now to Jerusalem, but it seems to me Gilbani, who's their head, seems much more in touch with the real world. He does not need a second front with Israel in any which way, and so he's playing it as cool as he can. The big question in my mind is there any chance of turning this in our favor? Is there any chance of actually reaching some sort of a peace agreement with the Syrians? After all, we did it with the Jordanians, we did it with the Egyptians, and all sorts of other places. The problem, of course, is with the Syrians, there's this little minor detail called the Golan Heights, and certainly Assad was not willing to give up 1 inch of the Golan Heights. Of course, he came from the party that lost it. Um, I suggest that Israel just basically offered to rent the Golan Heights from Syria for 200 years or something like that. Therefore, they can have their sovereignty, quote unquote, and we can keep it for 200 years, and we'll worry about it in 200 years. Um, but that would be one way of going. Obviously, it's been done in history. The British rented Hong Kong for many years. Eventually, they gave it back early, but that's a different story. The U.S. has an unlimited rental agreement on the Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. Since it's unlimited, they're there as long as the United States wants to be. So those things have been done in many cases, not many cases, but in a significant number of cases over a period of time. The Russians have also done something similar. So that's a possibility. I think one of our problems, one of my many problems, one of our problems is we don't take enough initiatives. Now I'm quite sure that the Mossad has extended some discussions somehow quietly with people in Syria. There are also all of these reports of the attempts to find the grave of our spy who was caught and executed in 1966, Ali Cohn. Um, that would be quite interesting, and it'd be quite a ceremony if they do find the remains and bring them back to Israel. Although first and foremost, I'd like to see us bring back the remains, first of all, of everyone in Gaza and the ones that are alive. We'll get to it in a minute. But also, there's the question of Ron Arad, who was the Israeli navigator who disappeared into the world of Syria, Lebanon. It's not quite clear where he disappeared. Iran. No one quite knows what happened to him. That's obviously, you know, more real in the sense that Arad still has a wife who's still alive, and I think children, if I'm not mistaken. So Eli Cohen, of course, I think has a brother who's still alive, and is concerned that he gets burial here in Israel eventually. So those are all interesting developments. They change the strategic map considerably. Um, there is no question that our strategic situation today is better than it was on the 6th of October. Our overall situation, that's a separate question. I don't think, and I'm writing an article about this at the moment, that the world and we ourselves fully understand the psychological impact that October 7th has made in Israel and the effect it's had. But leaving that part aside from trying to look at it from a strategic standpoint, we have not been in such a good position since the Six-Day War. Basically, Syria was considered our strongest enemy. It is gone as an enemy. The Hezbollah, which had the greatest threat to us because of their theoretical missiles, is gone in terms of their ability to threaten us. So, in terms of strategic situation, we're the best we possibly can be or have been in such a long time. Of course, the army wants lots and lots of, increase in budget to deal with all the mistakes of October 7th, et cetera, et cetera. I have a real problem with that. I have a real problem with making any decisions going forward without looking back. In other words, without having a National Commission of Inquiry. It's impossible, in my opinion, to come to the right conclusions of what sort of army we need, going forward. I think we may have made two quick mistakes because of, October 7th. We didn't have troops there to suddenly think we need a much larger army. Maybe we do. Maybe we don't. It turns out that part of the complaints right after October 7th was that look at all this money that Israel is wasting on the Air Force, on intelligence, And look what happened. We got October 7th in any case. And obviously, October 7th was a tremendous, tremendous failure of the intelligence, less so of the Air Force, but on some extent their lack of rapid enough response. But certainly since then, and certainly in terms of the Lebanese front and the Iranian front, all the money and time and effort that we've spent, both in terms of the intelligence services and the Air Force, have proven to be money well spent. So, to say that, okay, now we need a very large ground army, maybe we do, but maybe we don't. And I wish that people would slow down. We need to spend a lot of money right now on the military anyway, because even to maintain the size of the army we've had, equipment that's been at war for a year and a half. And so lots and lots of equipment have to be replaced, and people need rest and all those sort of things. But mostly the equipment has to be completely replaced, so large amounts of it. And so that's all going to cost money. And of course, I doubt we've quite replaced all of the missile interceptors that we've used during this war, both in the north and the south. And all that's going to cost money and time and effort. So the immediate needs for the army are very large. But I'm not happy with the concept of making long-term plans, before we've made an assessment of what worked and what didn't work in this war, what were the mistakes that were made, and obviously, what were the mistakes? Obviously, on October 7th, they're obvious, and yet they're not. You can't just make a big decision, a whole decision. There are lots of things you could do in between, and it needs careful thinking. And I fear that we're not going to make careful enough thinking. In any case, Syria, like I said, changes everything. It changes our strategic situation tremendously, because now we really have no significant threat on our borders. Iran is still a threat in terms of their missiles, but really a diminished threat because of what we've done to their anti-aircraft systems. We still have the Houthis, who every once in a while lob a missile at us. So far, they haven't gotten me to have to get up in the middle of the night or run down to the shelter in weeks, but it's a possibility at any given time. And so, they're going to have to be dealt with one way or the other sometime in the next few weeks, I believe. But let's first go back to Lebanon, and we'll get to Gaza, and we'll get to the internal stuff. So Lebanon, the ceasefire is clearly holding. Some people are saying, well, it's a ceasefire for 60 days. That's what was said. Only the person that says 60 days is Netanyahu. The Lebanese, Hezbollah, the Americans are all saying it's a permanent ceasefire. There's every reason to believe it's a permanent ceasefire. The interesting thing is the exact terms of this agreement have never been published in Israel. In other words, there are various reporters who've reported what they think of as what they found as the general terms, but no document has ever been shown to the Israeli public, which is quite amazing when you think about it. But this government has gotten away with that. I can imagine if it had been the other way around, the screaming and yelling, there would be about secret agreements and why has the public not been told about what's in the agreement, etc. But in any case, that agreement is holding. Israel has been vigorous in its side of upholding the agreement. Anything that they consider a violation, they've attacked, and they've continued to dismantle Hezbollah emplacements and other things in the area that they have not pulled out from yet, and they'll probably continue doing that till the last day. There is some question of whether that fits into the agreement, which I don't want to see, so I can't say for sure. But what we can say for sure is the Hezbollah cannot afford the war to resume. Even more so now, the fact that they're not going to be able to get any direct Iranian support. The head of Hezbollah yesterday gave a speech, and he lamented the fact that they've lost their land bridge, their ability to get supplies from Iran. For Iran to send Hezbollah supplies at this point can only be done by air. It can only be done very difficultly because they can't overfly Syria. I'm not really even sure where they'd overfly in order to get to Lebanon. And of course, the Israeli Air Force can turn back any transportation they think has arms on it, because the agreement, as best as I understand this agreement, does not allow for the Hezbollah to receive arms from Iran. So But Israel's been very, very vigorous in maintaining the terms of the ceasefire as it understands it. So I would suspect that will stay. I suspect we will see some changes in Lebanon generally. The fact that Syria is, remember that the reason Israel did not reach a peace agreement uh, with the Lebanese after the first Lebanon war was the fact that the president who was going to make that agreement was assassinated. The Syrians were deeply involved in Lebanon, and of course Hezbollah became involved, came into existence, and with the Syrians no longer in Lebanon and no longer affecting things in Lebanon, and with Hezbollah so weakened, I think we may see some significant changes. Lebanon desperately needs to have a normal government and a country that can encourage investment, go back to being what it used to be, which was a holiday source on the Mediterranean. Um, so we'll have to see. But I think there's some real possibilities there. It really depends on how strong the other Lebanese politicians are willing to be. But with Hezbollah in the state it's in, they may be unable to block a reshuffling of the deck in Lebanon. Gaza. We continue to have troops in Gaza, primarily in the Netzarim corridor and in the corridor, the Philadelphia corridor along the border. We keep on doing activities out of those corridors, trying to get more Hamas operatives, kill them, displace them. It's not quite clear what we're trying to accomplish at this point, but we continue to do it, whatever that is. Obviously, there are times when it becomes very costly, like what happened last week, when one rocket managed to kill a group of soldiers and wound a whole much larger number of soldiers. So it's war, and war is always dangerous regardless. And here, definitely, it continues to be and continues to be dangerous. How long will it go on for? Well, there are all of these signs, talks, etc., that they're close to an agreement with the hostages. This is going to be a multifaceted deal, not all at one time. It's not clear. It's not clear whether Netanyahu is willing to stop the war. It's not willing whether he's willing to take the risk to his coalition of Ben Gvir and Smotrich pulling out. It's not clear that Hamas is willing to give up their one card that they have, which are the hostages. So a lot of unclarity here. On the other hand, Hamas obviously needs some sort of ceasefire. Israel needs it. Israel needs to get back the hostages. I think it's now at somewhere in the area of 80% of the country is in favor of stopping the war in order to get back the hostages. 80% of those who have an opinion, excuse me, it's lower in terms of absolute numbers because like 15 or 18% don't have an opinion, but theoretically. But the overwhelming majority of people willing to stop the war to get back the hostages. It's really a question of really diminishing returns. Obviously, we're not going to eliminate the last member of Hamas that's in Gaza. That will take years, and it depends on what our goals are. It's an impossible situation because there is no question that Hamas has been the single largest obstacle to peace since the 1990s. If there had been a chance for peace, and I don't know that there was, but if there had been a chance for peace in the 1990s after Oslo, Hamas destroyed that. If there's a chance for reconciliation between Jews and Palestinians, Hamas this time destroyed that possibility for some significant period of time. So it would really be good if they disappeared from the earth, but I don't know that that's possible. So we'll have to see. So that's where we stand in Gaza. And the big question again is, how close are we towards an agreement? What sort of risks is Netanyahu willing to take at this point for an agreement? All unknowns, because it's to a large extent up to him. Although, like I said, it's not only up to him, it's also up to Hamas. And you get various opinions of whether Hamas is willing to make a deal or not willing to make a deal. right now, from the best of what I've understood, is we're waiting for an answer from Hamas to whatever the latest proposal was. Supposedly, we in the United States are on the same wavelength in terms of that proposal, and the Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration are also on the same wavelength when it comes to that proposal. Clearly, Trump coming to office and making it clear that he wants this done before he comes to office has certainly pushed things along. It certainly pushed Netanyahu to move along on this matter. He and he being Netanyahu and Trump spoke yesterday. Obviously, no details of what they spoke about were came out, but there's no doubt they talked about this, as well as no doubt the question of Iran. Um, there are a significant number of Israeli commentators and army people who say this is the perfect time to attack Iran. Uh, the fact is that by clearing out all the anti-aircraft sites and everything in Syria, that basically opens up a clear path to Iran. They didn't present such a challenge beforehand, but okay, um, that does open up a path. The fact that their anti-aircraft systems are down, destroyed, and will be down for a significant amount of time because Russia does not have any extra to send them until the war in Ukraine ends. That's another reason to say now is the time. But the problem always comes down to if Israel attacks alone, yes, Israel can get off a successful sortie, maybe two sorties against the Iranians, but what next? And I still claim I'm more interested, maybe attacking their nuclear program will have that effect, but to my view, what we need to do is we need to do things that will uh, undermine the regime. Because the only real solution to Iran is regime change. They've hated us since this regime has come to power. They have a theological hatred of us. Plus, there seems to be this, they're using us to try to get into the world of pan-Arabism. They failed at that, by the way. I mean, considering the fact that they've lost their client states, their whole attempt at using clients to try to attack Israel has failed. Uh, but um, again, the question is, we can't attack in the same way the United States can attack, and that's really the issue. Our Air Force is capable, it's accurate, has the best pilots, the best planes, but it's still small compared to two U.S. aircraft carriers basically have the same number of planes as our whole Air Force does. So slightly less, but close to it, especially if you take away our trainers and those sort of things. So um, that's the big question. There keeps on being talks that we will attack, right before the Trump administration comes in. I don't know. Again, I don't know what sort of agreements the BP has reached with Trump. Totally unclear. It's totally unclear where Trump stands on this. So we'll have to wait and see. But it could develop. It could develop in the next couple of weeks. There is, I guess, 6 weeks, 6.5 weeks until the inauguration. So that would be the window that people would expect it might take place. I say might. It's also the window that everyone expects a hostage deal to take place. So, first and foremost, a hostage deal. Most important thing. Most important thing for Israel, both for our national unity and for those poor hostages. I mean, how many of them are alive? Whatever's alive need to come home alive. There have not been Jews since the Holocaust that have lived through what these people have lived through, and I don't need, I can't imagine what it'll be like for our continued national trauma when we start hearing all the stories of what these people have lived through. And I'm sure we will hear them once they come back. Hopefully, we'll hear them. Hopefully, they'll be back and alive. But their trauma will be our trauma, and will add to the national trauma that exists in this country. Okay, that's mostly looking on the international side. A small side thing, which I was going to write about, which I'll write about tonight. Our very brilliant Minister of Foreign Affairs, a new one, decided to close the embassy in Ireland because they're so anti-Israel. It seems to me, and some other people too, it's rather, yes, the Irish government is very anti-Israel, but that does not seem to me to be a reason to fold your cards and go home, as opposed to at least keeping up the good fight and helping those people who are in Ireland who are pro-Israel. The Irish didn't call for ending relations. There's no reason why we should be closing relations just because they're anti-Israel. Yes, they're anti-Israel. That's very nice, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to maintain people-to-people relationship. We shouldn't maintain our embassy there. We're not talking about some small African country. We're talking about Ireland, still a member of the EU. Short-sighted and very populist, in my opinion. Anyway, in domestic affairs, I wrote about it the other day, and I'm writing about it more tonight. The judicial quote-unquote reform is back. It all has to do with the fact that Yariv Levin, who's the Minister of Justice, is obsessed by it more than anything else. And he has refused to allow the appointment of new judges and a new Chief Justice of the Supreme Court because he doesn't like the current deputy. And the system is set up for as long as it's been around that the Chief Justice is picked as the senior justice, the one who's been on the court the longest, and he automatically becomes the Chief Justice. The logic is, therefore, there won't be any internal politicking relating to decisions that relate to, support this, and I'll support you on this bill as long as you support me to become Chief Justice, those sort of things. And so the concept was to eliminate that whole issue by eliminating that the Chief Justice was an automatic. Whoever was on the court the longest would become the Chief Justice. The next person is considered on the liberal side of the Israeli bench, and so Yariv Levin does not want him. He's willing to make some sort of deal that would include maybe keeping him on, but he wants to appoint one or two people to the court to come from the Tikva Foundation, the group that helped support the judicial reform. But what he wants to do is he's taking people who have not been judges on the appeals court. In other words, generally speaking, all of the Supreme Court justices over the years have been people who are on the Israeli appeals court. In other words, Israel has three levels. It has, the regular municipal courts, or not municipal because they're all national, but the lowest level of court, there's an appeals court, similar to the U.S. appeals court, and then there's the Supreme Court. So generally speaking, similar to what happens mostly in the United States, the justices are picked from those serving on the appeals court. Once in a while over the years, someone who's been picked from academia, someone who's considered an expert in law, but generally they don't even like that because they want someone who's actually been trying cases and understands all those issues. It's very nice to be an expert from an academic standpoint, but it's not the same as having experience in a courtroom. So over the years, they've always been people who have come from not all, but most from the appeals court. Levin wants to cut that off and take directly from people he's worked with. He's threatened, if no agreement is reached, to bring back the whole judicial reform, quote unquote, among other things. He gets to pick who would be the justices automatically. Remember the fact that the difference between the Israeli system and the American system is there's no independent Knesset to advise and consent. Whoever the government picks, that's who it is. And so that's why there is no separation of powers between the two. The court is the only thing that's independent. And so people consider that very problematic. He's also, of course, bringing back the law that would let the simple majority override a court decision, all those sort of things. We'll see where that goes. The ultra-Orthodox said they're not on board until the law that will allow their students not to go to the army gets passed. It's not clear that can get passed. There are enough Likud members who are currently blocking it, who are not going to support it. We'll see how much they can be convinced to support it just the same. Okay, I think we're at a point of questions. Please raise your hand, so to speak, virtually, and hopefully I'll see you, or my wife will see you and yell to me. Okay, Michael Ross, and then Paul. Good.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Does the Israeli presence at the top of Mount Hermon have any strategic significance looking west to Lebanon as well as looking east to Syria?
Look, it's strategically important if we were to go to war. Does it have any importance in a time of peace or a time of minimal war? I don't think really looking. We have planes that can do looking. We have drones that can do looking. This is not 1950 when you have to have a highest point and then a lookout mount. I mean, it's good. It's always good. You can get the electronic warfare up high, all those things, but uh, it doesn't have the value it once did. Let's put it that
But
way.
if Hezbollah is not finished off, which it
About
isn't at
Hezbollah is
present,
finished
does
off
it?
effectively. Well, Hezbollah, without the ability to resupply its arms, I mean, it clearly does not have much left. If we saw what was coming in the last weeks of the war, the amount of missiles they were able to fire were not all that were not that high. The ones that could go to the middle of the country or long range seemed to be all gone because they weren't getting almost any off. Yeah, they're not completely gone, but they can't start up a war at this point or anytime soon because they can't be resupplied. They can't make their own weapons. So I don't see that. And again, having that location is not going to make any big difference strategically.
Okay.
Paul.
Yeah. So is the Lebanese government able to take back the country, or do you expect that might happen?
I expect it might happen. Again, I'm not an expert on Lebanon to the level that I could say it will happen. Um, I think that it's definitely something that might happen. They have a better chance of doing it now. Let's put it that way. A very weak Hezbollah has a good chance to do it. Without Syrian intervention on the side of Hezbollah, it's a much even stronger possibility of doing it. There really hasn't been enough that's come out talking about the effect of what's happened in Lebanon excuse me, happened in Syria on Lebanon. So I don't know that they can do it, but I think they have a chance of doing it. So uh, let's hope for the best. That's all I can say. Lebanese people deserve to have a normal government there. And, it used to be said years and years ago, before we had peace with Egypt, that Lebanon would be the second country to make peace with Israel. Couldn't be the first, but it would be the second. Unfortunately, all the recent history of Lebanon changed all of that. But wouldn't it be great? Um, you know, we can, you know, we can daydream of peace. Can we do all these things without peace with the Palestinians? I don't know how exactly, but maybe, maybe we can daydream at least. Richard.
So, I have a question about Iran. Given that the US and Russia lived through the Cold War, India and Pakistan have managed not to use them, even North Korea has not. How would you speak about the chances of Iranian actually using a nuclear weapon if they had one?
Okay, so we have to assume two things. One, we have to always assume that they might. We also have to take into account that the Iranian government currently, while it's rational, it's also religious. And religious people do things that isn't often rational, at least if they have a religious belief in something. So if they think they have the religious belief in destroying the Zionist entity called Israel, they might do it anyway. Even though, and that's where it comes down to, the fact of the matter is that we've developed a long time ago second strike capability. So first of all, a nuclear attack on Israel, if one and two bombs fell, I'd probably be dead because I'm within 2 blocks of the Israel military headquarters. But it wouldn't destroy the country. It would be very problematic, but it would not destroy the country, and it would not destroy our ability to hit back. And plus, we have these theoretically, we have submarines that are at sea at any given time that have the ability uh, to do a second strike. Now, and this is where it comes down to a separate issue, and I've always made this claim. I think that the Iranians might think it's okay to destroy in order to destroy Israel, that they would lose 20 million people in our second strike, for the sake of argument. However, because of our missile defense system, uh, they would not have enough missiles with nuclear warheads to overcome our missile defense system. At least not in any time in the near and medium term future. So if you're an Iranian, what is the worst case scenario? You fire a nuclear weapon at Israel. It gets blown up over Jordan or wherever it's going to be blown up in the upper atmosphere. And then Israel has to retaliate because deterrence basically says if you're attacked by a nuclear weapon, you must respond. I wouldn't want to have to be the Israeli prime minister or general had to decide where we were going to use our nuclear weapon, but we probably have to use a nuclear weapon. So if you're an Iranian and you're thinking logically, that's a scenario you're not going to want to deal with. And so that would be a very real scenario. That's why I've always believed in the missile defense system. It doesn't have to be 100%. It just has to be 95% because the Iranians would not know which would get through, if any would get through. And I'm going to assume, for the sake of argument at the moment, that our intelligence and our scientific ability would be good enough to, if they sent 100 rockets, 100 missiles, we'd be able to know which ones have actual nuclear warheads and which don't. And we'd obviously put all of our efforts at downing them. Again, nothing guaranteed. But again, get back to the original question, because the Iranian government is religious based and thinks that some of what it does is things that they're, effectively told by God, that's always dangerous. And so, neither North Korea nor Russia nor China, religion does not play a role in the decision making. Governments where religion plays a role, I'll even say in our own government, but any place that religion plays a role in government decisions is a very problematic thing, to say the least. And that's what I like about the American founders who believed in keeping religion out of government. It worked well for the United States until now. I'm not sure what's happening now, but it's worked well. It hasn't worked as well for Israel because we haven't been as clear about it. And it was one of the things that if we would have had a constitution, we would have taken care of. But that's probably part of the reasons why Ben Gurion didn't want to go with the constitution. He was afraid of what it would take to take care of it. So that's a long answer to the question is we can't be as nonchalant as we'd be if it was a normal government, but I think we'd be okay even if they get nuclear weapons, although, again, who wants to take that risk? That's the problem.
So if I can follow up, that almost suggests that we should take action and hope that that not only delays or destroys their nuclear capability, but perhaps incites an uprising to rid the government of the Islamic fanatics.
Right, so there's the question. I'm all in favor of taking action that will bring about, will result in an uprising. I am not an expert enough on Iran to say what that action is. I'm not sure taking care of, remote nuclear sites would be that. You could say that the Iranian people will all be angry at all the money wasted, etc. That might be. Supposedly they're pretty upset. There's an interesting article. I will try to link to it today in yesterday's New York Times about the criticism that the Iranian government has been getting publicly because of their support of Syria and how all that money has gone down the tubes. So that could be similar in terms of if we take out the nuclear program. But again, my fear is that we just don't have the capability to totally take it out. And therefore, it might not be successful, or even if successful, it's partially successful. And then what happens then? So I'm concerned. I would rather take out key economic targets. I'd rather find ways to, release all the prisoners in all their jails. I mean, all sorts of interesting things we might be able to do that I think might have a greater chance of overthrowing the government. But I'll leave that to people who are greater experts in Iran than I am. Steve. Steve, unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Now, yes. Yes, we can.
Okay. I'd like you to comment on the following, really. I mean, I obviously watch and read your outlet. I also watch others, such as Caroline Glick, Mark Regev, and Ruti, whatever her surname is. And I'd probably say, and a number of others, I'd probably say you seem to be more, if the word is correct, balanced, more in the middle. Because the likes of somebody like Caroline Glick, who at one stage was rumored as going to appear in Likud, but never did, with her, Netanyahu, and I have to say, I'm afraid I say him rather than Bibi, can do no wrong. He's the God. He's the only reason why Israel is in the positive situation they're in. And yet there are areas we've talked about, on previous meetings with you, such as the Haredim, such as the corruption charges that he's up against, everything that his desire to make it impossible to have a national commission of inquiry, and the fact that the argument, which may not be valid, that he wants the war to keep going on because it's the only thing that will allow him to stay in power. So I'd ask you to comment on the fact that there's, admittedly, it cannot be just black and white. There cannot be just one is all right and the other is all wrong. And I also find when I appear on Twitter, and I've got a following which may vary between 1,200 and 1,100. It usually goes down to 1,100 if I make a comment about Bibi. Although there may be some positive statements as well. So not that I'm no celebrity in that sense, but it's. I just like you to comment on that.
Okay, so I mean, Carolyn Glick, I've met her once or twice. I know what she stands for, and she's about as far right as anybody who claims to be a journalist, and I barely consider her a journalist. So, Carolyn Glick really is, everything he does is great, et cetera, et cetera. Look, is it all black and white? No, it's not all black. Is everything that Bibi does wrong? No, I mean, Bibi's a very smart guy. However, he, I believe, is responsible for more than anything else, the divisions in this country. He's worked on that constantly. He's worked on fear. Fear is one of the greatest motivators for voting. And time again, he's worked on the fear. The Arabs are all coming to vote. The seculars are not Jews anymore. All sorts of things in that direction. And he's worked really hard at it for all these years, and that's how he's kept his position in power. Remember, he doesn't get 50% of the vote. He gets 25% of the vote. But that's all you need, the way the Israeli system is developed. Has he made some right decisions? Well, I assume he's made some right decisions during this war, but let's go back a second. The fact of the matter is, he was told multiple times he was given plans to kill Sinwar, and he refused to go with it. Up until, including 2 weeks before the war began, he would not approve a plan that was presented to him to kill Sinwar. He was the designer of the plan to give Hamas money in return for quiet. That was his plan more than anything else. And he made sure it happened. He ignored all of the warnings that there was a war coming. They weren't necessarily for Hamas, but there was clearly warnings of a war coming because he went ahead with judicial reform anyway, quote unquote reform. And he ignored all of those things. Now, the army is responsible too. The army was warning. If the army was warning, they should have had lots of troops on the border at all given time. So, it's not only Bibi. Clearly, the army is as responsible or more responsible than Bibi was for the disaster of October 7th. But he's 100% responsible. He was the prime minister. And so, in any normal parliamentary democracy, he would have resigned. In Japan, he probably would have committed harikari. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, in all senses, anyone who says he can do no wrong is, first of all, no one can do no wrong. But B, I think he was very problematic from the very beginning when he first became prime minister back when he beat Paris the first time. However, without going back into that time frame, there is a real problem any place in the world when someone stays in power too long. When someone stays in power too long, people begin to lose the line between what I am and what the state is. What the state is becomes me, and what I am becomes the state. And that's very much, I think, Bibi's perspective. Only I can save the Jewish people. That's clearly where he thinks he stands. And it's not healthy in any situation, particularly in our situation, but any situation, any place. That's why, after FDR ran a third time, was elected a fourth time, the U.S., the first president to even try to run more than 2 times and to walk away from George Washington's 2-term limit, which held until FDR in World War II. That's why an amendment, constitutional amendment was passed to limit people to 2 terms. Because everyone realized, whether Democrats or Republicans, that too long in power is bad. And particularly in our system, it's even worse. So Bibi, I'm sure Bibi did really good things when he was Minister of Finance way back when. But as Prime Minister, it's really hard for me to pick too many good things he's done. I mean, certainly he got involved with the part of the agreements that Trump did with the UAE, etc. But he didn't move those. He agreed to them. That was brought to him by Trump's team more than anything else, and by Jared Kushner. So it's very hard for me to see what things that Bibi has done that's been wonderful. Let's put it this way: everybody who's worked with him closely has all left him. All of his political enemies are all people who used to work with him closely. He has nobody left who's ever worked with him who wants to stay with him. Gideon Saar just came back, and that was out of political necessity and the fact that I don't want to say anything nasty about Gideon Saar, but I can say lots of things nasty about what he did. So, my sense. And I thank you. I am a centrist. I've always been a centrist. Some people say I'm a leftist. I don't know why I would be considered a leftist, but I'm a centrist. I believe in being radically centrist, because only through centrism can we find a solution to most of our problems, whether here or in the United States, frankly. And the world has gotten more extreme. Nancy.
Hi, thanks, Mark. I read an article that Hamas was demanding that Marwan Barghouti be included in the prisoner release for a hostage deal, and that Netanyahu was refusing. Can you comment on that?
I heard the same thing. I do not know. Obviously, Marwan Barghouti could be problematic. Let's put it this way. I, a long time ago, thought we should have let go of Marwan Barghouti, but we had to dinner last night. One of our friends, who's an expert on Palestinian affairs, a professor in that area, and his comment was, "Don't expect Marwan Barghouti to be a Nelson Mandela." So, we have these hopes and expectations, and it's not my expertise; it's his expertise. That's his area of expertise, and that was his comment. As someone who had once been the Prime Minister's Arab Affairs expert, and today, like I said, as a professor in that area, and that's what he said to Friday night dinner last night. So,
well, can I just say one thing about that? He's more Mandela than Seymour, but even if he didn't turn out to be the greatest thing that happened, they want him out, and we want the hostages back. So, Lama, why not let him out? Why make that an issue that's going to drag this out further and have more of the hostages die in the meantime?
I guess from Netanyahu's perspective, and some part from the Israeli perspective, the problem being that if the Palestinians had an effective leader, there would be more of a push for a Palestinian state, all the things that are related to that. But understand something, the issue is, even those people who once favored a Palestinian state don't talk about that anymore. Even the Israeli left now talks about the need to separate ourselves. But after October 7th, it's going to take many years until anyone in this country is willing to think of, there'll be some people always dreamers, but there'll be a while until anyone's willing to think about the idea of a Palestinian state, because that's very problematic at the moment, and the world doesn't understand that. The Americans really don't understand that, because the most of the world is always a solution to a problem, and we have a problem that has no, at least, immediate solution. Paul again.
So, how, if at all, do you think things will change when Trump comes in? Do you think things will change fundamentally? He'll push Netanyahu to do things that Biden might have wanted but couldn't do?
I don't know. Like everything else about Trump, too many unknowns. The reason I wasn't thrilled about Trump is because we just don't know. We truly don't know what his policies are going to be in so many different areas. You have this push and pull, right? He likes to do things, right? Do, make deals and all that. He's a deal maker, okay? On the other hand, he's dealing with, he himself is semi-isolationist. He's dealing with his MAGA party, which is quite isolationist. So the question is, and God forbid he should die. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying that, but if J.D. Vance becomes president, then we're in real trouble. So It's really hard to know. Things look, people fear Trump for better or for worse. Is that good? Is it bad? Will it get good deals or bad deals? I don't know. It'll be interesting. That much I can say. But if anyone thinks they can, guess what Trump is going to do, I think that's a mistake. That's a mistake. The guy who was behind Project Warp Speed and developed the vaccine, and yet won't take any credit because all these anti-vaxxers in the MAGA world. Who knows? We don't know. We can hope for the best. We will find out. Okay, everybody, I thank you all for coming. Probably do it again in 2 weeks. Hopefully a bit of quiet 2 weeks, but nothing ever gets quiet in this country. That's one of the problems. The pluses and minuses of living here. And please, if you have ideas for other topics and things you'd like me to go into depth in the Tel Aviv Diary, I'd be happy to hear. Obviously, hopefully with the war becoming less and less of an issue, try to cover other topics in more depth. And please let me know, and we'll do some video interviews I'm hoping to do as time goes on as well. So anyway, thank you all for coming, and have a good 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.